La Escuela de Humanidades y Educación del Tecnológico de Monterrey en Campus Puebla les da la más cordial bienvenida a su podcast Atrévete a Saber, el nuevo espacio de divulgación del trabajo de investigación realizado por parte de los profesores de la Escuela de Humanidades y Educación. Les saludamos sus anfitriones, Rodrigo Esparza,
Connie Castillo
y Andrés Barradas.
Bienvenidos y comenzamos. Atrévete a Saber es un espacio de divulgación del conocimiento generado por nuestros colegas dentro de la EGE como parte de su labor investigativa. El saber no solo nos permite conocer el mundo, sino también generar una reflexión crítica sobre este y sobre las diversas aristas de la dimensión simbólica del humano. Demos, pues, al conocimiento ese cariz de atrevimiento, de aventura para ir más allá de lo inmediato y evidente y construir una nueva forma de concebir la realidad que permita dar nuestra ilusión humana de plenitud existencial. Hello, good morning, and welcome to Dare to Know. We're very excited. It's a great pleasure to receive Mindy Seu, technologist, designer, and she comes from New York City. Welcome, Mindy, to Mexico, welcome to Puebla, and very welcome to Tech Monterrey. We are very excited for joining us this morning. We are also having the presence of the student Andrea Flores, who's going to have part in this dialogue with Mindy. Welcome both. Mindy Seu is a designer and technologist based in New York City. Her expanded practice involves archival projects, technocritical writings, performance, lectures, design commissions, and close collaborations. Her latest writings survey historical precursors of the metaverse and reveals the materiality of the internet. Mindy's ongoing Cyberfeminism Index, which gathers 3 decades of online activism and net art, was commissioned by Reason and presented at the New Museum, and it is a recipient of Graham Foundation grant. She has lectured internationally at cultural institutions, Barbican Center, New Museum, academic institutions, Columbia University, Central St. Martin's, and mainstream platforms, Pornhub, Google, among many others, and has been a resident at McDowell's, Sidework Foundation, Pioneer Works, and Internet Archive. Mindy holds a Master Design from Harvard's Graduate School of Design and Bachelor Arts in Design Media Arts from the University of California in LA. She is currently assistant professor at Rogers Mason Gross Schools of the Arts and critic at Yale School of Art. On the other hand, Andrea Flores is a first semester communication student at the Tecnológicos de Monterrey. In her academic, creative, and personal journey, she has been focused and interested in various topics such as storytelling, history, psychology, gender studies, and philosophy. She loves to generate and consume narratives that question the state of things, and loves to explore the gathered knowledge and experience on new unknown topics. So, very welcome. It's a great pleasure having both of you.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. And great to be in conversation with both of you.
Thank you. Likewise.
I wish I could speak a lick of Spanish, but thank you so much for doing this in English.
Great.
Well, we always make the same question to our guest. So we are going to start with these questions. Why do you think we should dare to know?
Why should we dare to know? I think that during last night's event at the Museo, a recurring theme was moving towards our curiosities. So rather than moving with the flow of the market or the flow of media consumption, if we actually move towards things that inspire an obsessive rigor in each of us, this is kind of how these fields of knowledge production or art or design kind of expand. So I think this daring to know is about daring to expand the fields, question things that have been handed to us, and kind of really unpacking things that we've been conditioned with.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, to begin with, we want to start asking you in a more general aspect, what do you believe is the role of technology in our existence as human beings?
That's a very broad question. The role of technology in the existence of human beings. Well, I think that technology itself is quite a broad term. So if I think these days it might have a digital connotation. An example I really like giving is that of the carrier bag theory by Ursula K. Le Guin. This essay has been a huge inspiration for me. It came out in the mid 80s. And she basically proposes that the first tool is not the spear, which is a tool of dominance, but rather the basket, which is a tool of gathering. So, what this story does is it posits a few things that technology is more than the digital, that we can also refer to these ancestral technologies. It also reframes our history of technology away from the victor or the individual hero towards a community, from a he to a we. And it also lets us know that leaning on these ancestral technologies is an important way to kind of understand new technologies moving forward. So I think that technologies have been around since the origins of humankind, and they will continue to be in conversation with us into the far future.
In that sense, do you think that technology could guide us to our destruction?
I think that generally I try not to use binaries when thinking about these types of things. Technology can be used in a negative way, and technology can be used in a positive way. And if anything, the same technology can be used in a negative or positive way. So right now, everyone's talking about ChatGPT-4 or AI or Web3 or etc. So while there are very positive or even emancipatory potentials of these new tools, there are also very dystopic uses of these tools. So generally, I don't think it's about the technology or tool itself, but in fact how it's used or how it's created moving forward.
Maybe like whether you view more technology as like a reflection of ourselves or more like an asset or like an extension. Like what do you believe is our relationship with technology?
I think that generally technology has become an extension of the human body. So when we think about the wheel, some might say it's an extension of the foot, or a pencil is an extension of the hand. Mm-hmm. And even now, these computers in our pockets, our iPhones, are extensions of how we interact online in these greater spaces. And again, going back to its use, there's this concept of, let's say, an example of the broom. So you can use the broom with its intended function, which is to sweep. You can also turn it around and break a window. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, no matter how you choose to use it or misuse it, it changes the shape of the body of the human hand. So I think it kind of goes to show how entangled all of these things really are.
In the sense that you said, technology is kind of an extension of our body, even our willness. Mm-hmm. Could be the technology be an extension of our more evil thoughts?
Yes, I do think that can be the case, because if we think about mainstream technologies now, it's, to use the example of the internet, for example, when the internet first emerged, it was really considered this utopic space, that anyone with access to a personal computer or the internet could suddenly communicate with everyone, right? It's like Marshall McLuhan's global village. But what we forget is the infrastructure of the internet actually was emerged from a military industrial complex. So all of these things that built the architecture are shaping how these behaviors are intensified moving forward. And these things like surveillance or data extraction or etc. have almost always been possible because of this architectural backbone, and have now been exacerbated by these platforms that now run the majority of these platforms that we use. So I'm thinking like GAFA, Google, Apple, Facebook, Alphabet, etc. So if we think about the people who are really pushing forward the development of technologies, I think it can actually be used in a quote unquote evil or just more capitalistic way, because those are the primary incentives for the goals they're trying to hit. Whereas perhaps some of the other subversive or liberatory angles, these are still being constructed, but on a much smaller scale. So it's harder to hit these mainstream or the amount of users that actually are able to inflect widespread change rapidly. All that said, I do think that grassroots activism really works and the subversion of these tools works well. So I would definitely encourage both of these rather than just embracing this fate of like a dystopic techno wasteland.
Okay, thank you. Mindy, let's move to cyberfeminism. How does Mindy Seu understand cyberfeminism?
So historically, cyberfeminism has been given a lot of different definitions depending on the time period, the person, or the region. But I like describing it by breaking apart the word itself. So this prefix cyber first emerged in Norbert Wiener's Cybernetics in the 1940s. So this was proposing that you are impacting a system, but that system is also impacting you. So you're in this feedback loop of inputs and outputs. Cyber was then fixed to space in William Gibson's Neuromancer in the 1980s. So cyberspace in Gibson's retelling was quite important because it kind of predicted some of these sensory networked online landscapes that we're very much talking about today with the metaverse and virtual realities and etc. But Gibson's cyberspace was also very characterized by the male gaze. So you have fembots, cyber babes, and etc. So when VNS Matrix and Sadie Plant, unbeknownst to the other, both coined cyberfeminism, by bringing apart these two words, that's these seemingly disparate word parts, it was almost like a provocation. So how could women and feminists and marginalized communities shape what cyberspace might be? In an earlier panel with Sadie Plant, she actually described how the term cyberfeminism in the beginning was almost intended as a joke. It was a bit farcical, and she never really imagined that it would kind of take on this second wave and third wave that we're seeing now. So ultimately, I think that cyberfeminism is about the feedback loop, going back to the cybernetic origin. So it's not only about disseminating feminism through online channels, it's also about being critical of that technology through its use. So for me, it has to have both of these components.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, also talking about cyberfeminism, nowadays communities, organizations, and our society in general tends to be more focused on solving more pragmatical issues, such as the hunger, healthcare, war, more like physical things that we can directly see. And perhaps to them and us as a society, cyberfeminism would not seem like an urgent or important issue to be paid attention. So why do you think cyberfeminism is relevant nowadays?
Well, I think that it goes back to this idea of the internet being extremely material. So those who argue that it might be irrelevant now because it feels very ephemeral or maybe only for an elite few, we forget that the use and development of the internet is built into the earth and really affecting a lot of these things. So the rare earth minerals that make up our phones are typically mined in Latin America in regions that have very little or non-existent labor laws. When you recycle your iPhone, these are typically shipped to Weiyu, China, which is in rural China. The people there try to break apart the phones to sell different parts, but everything else is burned. And that really impacts the soil and leads to higher rates of cancer in that region. So yes, we can say that like maybe online activism is less impactful than activism on the ground, but we also forget that this very ephemeral space that we're thinking of is part of a very physical ecosystem. And these server farms require massive amounts of energy and cooling systems. Even sending an email has a carbon footprint. So I do think cyberfeminism and a critical use of the internet and technology at large is a very important thing to consider, especially in today's climate.
Well, and I think not only that, but what you said about like the input and output, that cyberfeminism deals with like this constant feedback, that the internet is giving us feedback from our society and we're giving it feedback.
Exactly.
So it is a reflection of our society, and through the internet, these like more physical consequences can manifest themselves, right? The internet can proliferate wars, it can proliferate hunger, and with what you just said, it directly affects the environment, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, how would be an easy way to explain why does the cyberfeminism is important to take on discussion?
Well, I think that, so if we think about active internet users of the global population, that's only around 65 to 70%. So this is actually rather low, because that means that 30 to 35% of the global population are not active internet users. That said, as the majority of use, it's almost, for those who actively use it, it has become such an extension of our daily lives, right? When I think about my day to day, I can't actually work without, or even leisure online, without access to these online spaces and online tools and online communities, people that I'm only interacting with via email or social networks. So I think that in this way, the connectivity angle is still quite relevant and feels very important now. But that also means that we, for those who actively use it, need to be able to question what kind of behaviors these tools are promoting, and if that's actually how we want to move in these online spaces, and if they can be used and or designed or created in an alternate way to support more people.
Okay, thank you, Mindy. According to some cyberfeminism, why should we constantly critically assess technology, or more specifically with new technologies?
How can we assist technologies?
Assess.
Assess. Yeah. How can we assess new technologies? So I think this goes back to what we discussed last night about use or design or construction. I think there are multiple angles for talking about this. So when I'm with my students, we're typically talking about it from a design or construction side, whereas maybe in a more mainstream lecture, we talk about more of the use. And these things can kind of be subverted from both angles.
Okay.
So I like this quote by Legacy Russell: "The glitch is the correction to the machine." So she used this in her book Glitch Feminism, which came out a few years ago. And I like this quote because it implies that the glitch, which we typically see as an error, is actually something to be embraced, that it actually reveals the breaking points of a system and proposes how it could be fixed, or in fact, some of the ways that it can be used unintentionally. So this is kind of some of the potentials that I see in a very abstract way moving forward.
Most of the people are in contact with technology in sense of use, not in terms of design.
Yes.
How can we realize about the real intentions when someone designs new technology as users?
So I think this points back to these behaviors that are encouraged that we might not recognize. So for example, when we think about the creation of Google, while on the one hand, they were talking about democratizing the world's knowledge, it was also encouraged that we would click as quickly as possible, because this was one of their primary schemes for monetization. So it was inspired by academic articles. Links were weighted depending on the prestige of the author and how many people were citing it, similar to academic articles, let's say. So this impacted SEO and things, but because they wanted you to click through as many links as possible, this pushed us away from this leaning towards in-depth, long-form reading. So now we see these terms emerge now, like clickbait or surfing or etc. So if we actually do follow this very rapid clickbaity internet surfing, it's not that we're doing anything wrong. We're actually doing what the platform was designed to make us do. Like this beta testing is doing, we're basically following how our bodies work and how we are receptive to dopamine and etc. So for us to stop behaving in this way, it actually requires a lot of willpower and intentional behavioral change to slow down and use this technology in a way that it was not intended. So I don't want to put all of this weight on the user for how to impact things, but if we wait for the platform to change this philosophy, their guiding principle is scalability and monetization. So I think that will actually take a lot longer than individual behavioral shifts.
Okay, thank you. Unlike the other activist movements, cyberfeminism is yet to reach mainstream status, so to speak, and could seem like more hidden or underground movement. With this in mind, how did you manage to reach and approach cyberfeminism?
So the term cyberfeminism does feel quite 90s. We describe it as, my collaborators and I describe it as like an imperfect umbrella term, as to way to bring together and see the through lines between a lot of different online movements or theories that have a critical use and practice of technology. So, for example, cyberfeminists now might call themselves techno-feminists in 2023, 3 decades later. We also see these other terms emerging. So in Latin America, we saw the coining of the word hack feminista or trans hack feminista. In Korea, you use the term net femies. Laborio Cubonics coined xenofeminism, Legacy Russell's glitch feminism. Like there's so many different strands, and maybe these are all extremely niche, but they're ways of kind of pointing at some of the problems that we're seeing with technology today, how it only supports the mainstream few, how it's kind of built upon the backs of a lot of other communities, and it's how it's not actually as utopic. It doesn't maintain the utopic principles that it was initially promoted as. So I don't know if niche is its intention. I think it's trying to reveal the problems of mainstream technologies to the masses, and it's just going about in a grassroots, very rhizomatic way.
Thank you.
So moving on to like your work and what we saw from you. We managed to visit not only the Cyberfeminist Index, but we also visited your personal webpage where you talk about yourself. And the first time I opened it, I was really shocked and kind of scared to open it. I clicked it away immediately because I thought it was a virus. You know, I was like, this can't be it, you know? And then I watched your video and I read about you and everything, and I realized that's the way it looks like. And it differs from the stereotypical web pages we would expect from academics and designers, especially. So we wanted to ask you, what was the intention specifically behind this design?
Yes, so if you visit mindyseu.com, it only uses HTML and very slight CSS. So for those who are unaware, HTML and CSS are the backbones of all websites. HTML is essentially markup or content, whereas CSS is the style. At the bottom, there's a link to the prof doc style written by Olia Lealina. And the prof doc style is basically a genre of web pages that came out in the 90s where professor doctors would create these very rudimentary HTML focused websites at the time because it was easier to push online, but also because it's very easy to maintain and it's easy for anyone to do regardless of your technical capability. It's not like the complexity of JavaScript or dynamic loading or things like these. So I intentionally chose to do a text-based website, no images, with a lot of external links and links to collaborators. One, because it's easy to maintain. Two, the website is very lightweight. So also thinking about the environmental footprint, when we think about these like high gloss websites, which I've also designed for various clients, the loading times, the animations, the videos and the images and the assets, all of these add to a certain carbon footprint. And these things, I guess we won't get into like client server side, but I like this idea of someone going to a web page. There's a list of links, and if you want to learn more, then you can dig into it. But it's almost written in a kind of like essayistic style. So it feels very casual, and I just like this ability of very easy maintenance. So at the bottom, I also keep track of all the text changes I make. So it's kind of like reading through a public-facing journal in some way. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I hadn't thought about that, for example, about the carbon footprint, because we often omit that in our thoughts about the internet, that it feels like this ethereal space that doesn't take up space in our physical world when it does. So that's really interesting.
Sorry you were scared of it though.
No, I'm sorry I got scared. But yeah, I clicked it away. I was like, oh, this is a virus. But it got me thinking. It really it made me question my concepts about the internet, and also kind of maybe the, I don't want to say like colonization, but like the like the this pre-concept that we have about like what a web page is supposed to look like.
Yes.
Which is similar to the way we have concepts about society, about, for example, whiteness, straightness, about gender roles, you know? And I was like, we even have those in web pages where we're like, if it's not like properly, quote unquote, designed, people don't look at it, or they're like, it's not legitimate.
Right. I think that's a great point too, because my background is graphic design. So you have a certain style in mind that you expect when you visit the webpage of an academic versus a doctor versus an artist. And stripping all of that down to kind of the bare essentials, it does make you question what are different things that we consider legitimizing or not, and trying to kind of push against that.
Exactly. And it also makes you like question the examples that you gave in your lecture, in your video lecture that we saw. A lot of them were like very low resolution images. They were quote unquote not properly designed as people would describe it, even though that is design, right?
Yes.
It is designed by definition. And you would look at these web pages, activism web pages, and you would think they're not legitimate because of the way they look. And then we scramble to other web pages like from like established institutions like Google or like even universities, and we're like, oh, this looks legit, so it must be legit. When in reality it's not. And the internet, like, you don't need to be able to design the way we are supposed to design to put out like information in the world.
Right. I think it's also we have to question who defines what good design actually is. Like, why are we trying to encourage like seamless, speedy online interaction? There's another artist and web developer, Yeowon Song, who instead of making websites that are quote unquote user friendly, her term is anti-user friendly. So when you go into them, you kind of get lost in this maze of all of these interactions. And I think it makes us question these online behaviors, but also brings us a sort of play back online, right? Like, it doesn't have to be this hyper efficient thing that we're constantly promoting.
Yeah. So we also went to look at your Cyberfeminism index, of course. We scrolled to it. And what caught our attention was the submit button at the lower left side of the webpage. And we became curious about how this collaboration process in the webpage would work. So we wanted to ask you, like, for starters, what can people submit to the index?
So that submit button has been a very important part of this project because about 70% of the index is crowdsourced. So either that was said word of mouth to me that I would then attribute to these various people, or it was people I didn't know who were submitting things on their own. So what I like about this is it allows for the constant mutation of the term. So generally, while I am trying to focus on those two parameters, dissemination of feminism online and criticality of technology through its use, this changes depending on region, when the internet was adopted, cultural context, etc. So people have been submitting a variety of things across genre. So you have academic articles, you have artworks, you have hacker spaces, you have hashtag activism. But what's most important, or region, I also like seeing like where these different things are happening. But generally, it allows the online website to feel like a living, growing index in perpetuity, whereas the book feels like a snapshot of the website's mutation. So both of these things, I think, are complementary.
Okay. And when people submit to this index, do you personally curate like what goes on the index and decide? Because like we were also curious about that. What if I were to go in there and just submit a random article about something that's not really related, or perhaps something that is like, you know, it has been thought through, but it's not related to cyberfeminism?
Sure. Well, so it is moderated. When you currently submit, it's not a live, it doesn't appear immediately on the website. It goes to a spreadsheet that me or various people look at, and then we will actually grab images, make the proper citation, grab the excerpt, and then include that on the website. So there's a workflow in place. But generally, we like to submit because it kind of expands our definition of cyberfeminism. So if something is submitted that I feel I'm not sure why they submitted it for this particular collection, I will either email them and ask them to clarify, like, how do you define cyberfeminism and why do you think this falls under that?
Yeah.
And in some ways, this has been really interesting because it allows my own definition of cyberfeminism to mutate. And other times, we feel like it's too broad or it's too far removed or it's even trolling, so then we won't accept it.
Yeah, because I imagine that'd be like there's probably a bunch of trolls that started submitting weird stuff in there.
Yeah, surprisingly there hasn't been too many, but I think with these public sites there's always a few.
Yeah.
We're near to close our interview, so our last question is the next. What would you say is the main contribution of this research? I mean, I'm referring to Cyberfeminism Index.
The main contribution of my research?
Yes.
So I like this term, gatherer. This also refers back to that Ursula Le Guin story, but also the activist and author Adrienne Maree Brown. For her book, Pleasure Activism, she used the byline, edited and gathered by Adrienne Maree Brown. And I was so puzzled by this when my friend Laura Combs found it. So for me, I think gathering has been a really important method that I've embraced because it allows me to create certain parameters that collect a lot of things to create these sort of like resource compendiums, source books, pedagogical tools, etc. It also helped me realize that research can manifest in any form. So because my background is in art and design, it's felt like, okay, we gather all these things first, we attribute the people who submitted these various things, and it feels very collective and co-authored, and then we think carefully about the container for how they manifest. The website, the book structure, is it a performative reading? Is it some sort of collective workshop? Like there's so many different ways to activate that content. So I really like letting the content or the materials kind of speak to what the final form or the ongoing form should be.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to add something?
I don't think so, because then we'd extend this for a really long time, but it has been really, really, truly enlightening and very, very inspiring.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you both of you for these thoughtful questions. It's been great to be in conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you. It has been a great pleasure having you here and having this small conversation.
And you coming all this way, you know?
Yeah, next time I really hope to have more time in Puebla because it's beautiful.
We'd be really glad to have you.
Finally, where does our audience can find your work on
So
online?
my fun fact, my last name is actually a misspelling. My grandpa misspelled it when he immigrated.
Wow.
So that means that no one else has my last name. It's Mindy Seu. So if you look up Mindy Seu, you'll find this on Instagram, Twitter, my virus-friendly website, and also my email. So I'm very accessible online.
Okay, thank you very much, Mindy. Thank you very much, Andrea.
Thanks, Rodrigo.
Once again, it has been a great pleasure. And see you next emission. And finally, don't forget to dare to know.
Thank you so much. Dare to know.
Thank you. Okay. Muchas gracias por su generosa atención y nos encontramos en nuestra próxima emisión de su podcast Atrévete a saber. ¿Y tú, te atreves?